In the Nile sands, archaeologists found 3-meter-long sarcophagi that history books don't explain or mention. The official narrative claims Egypt arose from farmers, but Ethiopian texts reveal a vastly different story. The manuscripts of Axum reveal a hidden truth. Pharaohs and gods shared a forbidden bloodline that transcends time. This blood was not human, and its trace crosses through Sumeria, the Sinai, and the sacred mountains of the Horn of Africa. Today, we will unearth a secret that connects the Sumerian Anunnaki with the Watchers described in the Ethiopian Bible. What you will discover will forever change the way you view the pyramids and obelisks of the ancient world. Because behind every hieroglyph lies a silenced memory of beings descended from a forbidden sky above. Academia refers to these findings as simple Ooparts, out-of-place artifacts, which are easily dismissed and forgotten. However, the African Ooparts are far too numerous to be mere coincidences or archaeological dating errors. Blocks of impossible granite, vessels carved from diorite, and precise star maps predating any telescope ever invented. But there is an even more disturbing detail that connects all these enigmas into a single coherent narrative. This detail resides in Ethiopia, guarded by monks who recite texts that Rome sought to erase from the Christian canon. The Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees describe celestial beings that physically descended upon earth. They were not mere spirits or metaphors. They were real beings with appetites, desires, and descendants of their own. These texts refer to them as Watchers, 200 beings who descended upon Mount Hermon to violate a divine law. The question that few dare to ask is why only Ethiopia preserved this dangerous version of the story intact. The answer may be hidden in the sacred geography that connects Ethiopia with the lost heart of Egypt. Because the Nile civilization did not arise from nothing, as if it spontaneously sprouted amidst dunes and palm trees. Its complexity, perfect hieroglyphs, and precise astronomy suggest a heritage that predates it. A heritage passed down by a lineage that survived the flood, or returned afterward to rebuild what was lost. This lineage, according to Ethiopian texts, was that of the giants, the offspring of the Watchers, and mortal women. And here begins the true mystery that official history has chosen to bury under 7 layers of silence. Let us now compare the two traditions that seem to tell exactly the same story from different latitudes. In Sumeria, the tablets speak of the Anunnaki, those who came from heaven to earth, according to their translation. In Ethiopia, the Watchers descend from the sky upon a sacred mountain to teach and reproduce with humans. Both traditions agree on the number, the hierarchy, and the conflict that erupts between the newcomers and the locals. Both describe a rebellion, a transgression of celestial laws, and a genetic mixing with the human race. Are we facing two ancient peoples that invented the same myth, or are we witnessing two witnesses to the same event? The coincidence is too precise to be casual, too detailed to be a simple cultural borrowing or exchange. The Anunnaki arrived, according to Sitchin, seeking gold in a region that the Sumerians called Abzu, the abyss. That Abzu was located in the south, in deep lands that today we identify with Eastern and Southern Africa. Interestingly, ancient Kush mentioned in the Bible precisely occupied Ethiopia, Sudan, and gold-rich areas. Kush was famous for its gold, for its inexhaustible mines, and for a wealth that astonished even King Solomon. The Queen of Sheba, hailing from that region, arrived in Jerusalem with amounts of gold that seemed supernatural. What if that gold was not mere ornamentation, but the spoils of a mining operation initiated thousands of years earlier? The Watchers, according to Enoch, taught humans how to extract metals and work gold using secret techniques. The same mining technology appears in Sumerian legends, attributed directly to the original Anunnaki beings. Three distinct traditions, Sumerian, Hebrew, and Ethiopian, point to the same place, the same metal, the same motive. And all indicate that this activity was directed by superior beings, whom humanity confused with gods. Genesis 6 refers to them as the sons of God, Bene Elohim, a phrase that in Hebrew never means mere angels. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki, the princely descendants of An, the supreme god of the highest heaven. The Egyptians referred to them as Neteru, the divine watchers, a word that shares roots with the Ethiopian term. Three cultures, three languages, three geographies, but one single identity hidden behind different masks. If we accept this convergence, then the gods of pharaonic Egypt were not spiritual abstractions at all. They were distorted memories of physical beings who ruled, taught, and then disappeared from the human horizon. But before disappearing, they left behind a hybrid offspring, the Nephilim, the fallen ones, the giants of Genesis. And that offspring, according to Ethiopian texts, came to sit upon the most sacred thrones of the Nile. Observe closely any Egyptian relief, any carved wall in Karnak, Abu Simbel, or Luxor. You will always see the same thing, a colossal figure of the pharaoh crushing tiny enemies beneath his enormous feet. The academic explanation claims it is an artistic convention, a visual metaphor for absolute royal power. But this explanation never addresses why the proportion remains even in intimate and private statues. The Colossi of Memnon measure 18 meters. Ramses in Abu Simbel reaches 20 meters while seated on his throne. If they were mere metaphors, we would not find anthropomorphic sarcophagi measuring 3 meters and 30 centimeters. These sarcophagi exist, they are catalogued, and they still lack a coherent explanation from Egyptology. Some were found empty, as if the bodies had been moved or stolen in remote times long past. Others contained remains that, according to leaked reports, showed bone anomalies compatible with gigantism. The Ethiopian Bible describes giants of enormous height, capable of devouring the produce of entire villages. It even speaks of 3,000 cubits as the measure of the largest, a symbolic figure, but also chilling. Even if we reduce that figure to realistic proportions, we are still talking about beings 4 or 5 meters tall, a height that coincides with the anomalous Egyptian sarcophagi and the gigantic doors of certain temples. Why build entrances 12 meters high if the average users measured barely 1 meter 70? The sacred architecture of ancient Egypt seems designed for a race different from the one that ultimately inhabited it. As if the first builders and the last occupants belonged to radically different statures and physical forms. This is one of the most disturbing clues that connects the reliefs, the sarcophagi, and the Ethiopian texts. And still, there is the most unsettling element of all, the one that explains how these beings emerged in the first place. The Ethiopian texts are explicit in describing the origin of the giants that sowed chaos before the flood. The Watchers took human women against the will of heaven and fathered a monstrous hybrid race. This hybridization was not accidental. It was deliberate, planned, almost an early form of genetic engineering. The Sumerians narrate the same when they speak of how the Anunnaki created the Adamu by mixing their essence with clay. Clay, in symbolic language, represents the primitive biological matter upon which something new was introduced. Something that added height, intelligence, longevity, but also pride, violence, and an insatiable thirst for power. These traits define exactly the divine pharaoh, the demigod, the king who proclaimed himself the son of the sun. Egyptian royalty did not consider themselves human. They regarded themselves as direct descendants of the original Neteru. Royal blood could not mix with the common folk, which is why they married among brothers for entire generations. This biologically disastrous endogamy only makes sense if it protected a very specific genetic lineage. A lineage that had to be kept pure at all costs, even if it produced diseases, deformities, and dynastic madness. The Watchers, according to Enoch, also taught the arts of mixing, the enchantments, and manipulation. Forbidden knowledge that heaven never wanted humanity to possess, because it altered the natural order. If the pharaohs were heirs to that wisdom, then they possess technologies that we cannot even imagine today. And here enters another fundamental pillar of the enigma, the impossible technology of ancient Nile civilization. Enoch recounts that the Watchers taught men astronomy, geometry, and celestial movements with great precision. This sacred information was transmitted to the Egyptian priests, the guardians of the stellar temples of the Nile. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned to true north with a precision of 3/67ths of an arc degree. No modern civilization can match that precision without laser instruments and geostationary satellites. The ventilation shafts of the king's chamber point exactly toward Orion and Sirius, with no perceptible error. Orion, in Egyptian mythology, was Osiris, the god who descended from heaven to teach civilization to mankind. Sirius was Isis, his celestial consort, and together they represented the primordial couple that originated divine royalty. Is it a coincidence that these stars are also central in the ancient Sumerian, Dogon, and Ethiopian cosmologies? The Dogon people of Mali knew the invisible orbit of Sirius B centuries before science confirmed it. They claimed that their ancestors received this knowledge from the Nommo, amphibious beings descended from the sky. The Nommo coincide point by point with the Sumerian description of Oans, the amphibious messenger of the Anunnaki. And Oans coincides with Enki, the Sumerian god who taught civilization, writing, and agriculture to humans. The chain of identities is unbroken, crossing continents, languages, and millennia without losing coherence. But astronomy was not the only forbidden gift transmitted by these celestial visitors to humanity. They also taught, according to Ethiopian texts, how to manipulate sound, vibration, and material frequency. This teaching would clarify the long-standing mystery of how ancient Egyptians transported massive megalithic blocks. We are talking about blocks weighing 200, 300, even 800 tons, placed with millimeter precision. Official theories speak of ramps, wooden rollers, and crowds of workers pulling with ropes to move these massive stones. However, no modern experiment has managed to replicate the transportation of a 100-ton block in this manner. Ancient Coptic texts speak of priests who recited words of power to make the stones float effortlessly. Medieval Arab accounts describe how the high priest struck the rock with a resonant magical rod to achieve this. Today we would call this advanced acoustics, sonic levitation, and manipulation of specific resonant frequencies. Recent experiments with focused ultrasound have managed to levitate small objects in modern laboratories. If the Watchers truly mastered this technology, moving obelisks weighing 1,000 tons would have been almost trivial. And this would explain why, after the pre-dynastic period, no one ever built with that same mastery again. The sacred technology was sealed, buried in secret temples, transmitted only to very select initiates. When the last initiates died, the knowledge was lost, and only the mute stones remained as witnesses. But there is one figure that crosses all traditions and seems to have been the guardian of these secrets. In Egypt, he was called Thoth, the long-headed ibis, divine scribe and custodian of celestial wisdom. In Ethiopian and Hebrew tradition, he is called Enoch, the antediluvian patriarch who walked with God and did not die. Enoch was taken to heaven alive, according to the Book of Jubilees, to learn the secrets of cosmic order. He received tablets of angelic wisdom, which he later wrote down and shared with his children before the flood. Thoth, in Egypt, also possessed emerald tablets where the knowledge of the gods was inscribed in detail. Both are scribes, both are mediators between heaven and earth, both are immortal or nearly immortal beings. The identification between Thoth and Enoch has been defended by Hermeticists, Gnostics, and the early Ethiopian fathers. This is not a modern invention. It is a continuous tradition that crosses Egypt, Ethiopia, Israel, and Hellenistic Greece. If Enoch and Thoth are indeed the same figure, then the Book of Enoch is also a camouflaged Egyptian text, and the Ethiopian Bible becomes the only surviving window into the lost wisdom of the deep Nile. A wisdom that Rome tried to erase, that Byzantium condemned as apocryphal, and that only Axum managed to preserve. Axum, the capital of the ancient Ethiopian kingdom, guards traditions that no other Christian church maintains intact. There, according to tradition, rests the Ark of the Covenant, brought by Menelik, son of Solomon, and the Queen of Sheba. The Ark itself was an advanced technology, a box capable of killing anyone who touched it without priestly authorization. A description that unsettlingly resembles an electrical or radioactive device more than a sacred piece of furniture. What if the Ark was also a legacy from the Watchers, an instrument for communication with the lost heavens? The question remains open, but the invisible thread connecting Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sumeria never completely breaks. However, all this celestial glory was destined for a tragic end foretold from the very beginning. The Ethiopian texts are brutal in describing the final fate of the giants and their rebellious celestial parents. The Watchers were chained in abysses of darkness beneath the earth until the day of the final judgment arrives. Their children, the giants, could not be forgiven, for their hybrid nature was incompatible with salvation. Then heaven decided on a terrible punishment, a civil war among the giants themselves to self-destruct. Brother against brother, clan against clan. The Nephilim devoured each other in battles of cosmic proportions. The earth trembled under the weight of their corpses, and the oceans turned red for entire generations. What remained afterwards was purified by the waters of the flood, described in Sumerian, Hebrew, and Ethiopian alike. But no flood completely erases a race. There are always survivors, fragments, hidden seeds that endure. The Ethiopian Bible suggests that some giants survived, taking refuge in high mountains and deep caves. From them would descend the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, mentioned by Moses in his journey through Canaan. And from them would also descend certain pre-dynastic Egyptian dynasties, prior to the unification of the kingdom. This would explain the cranial anomalies found in tombs such as those of Amarna and other minor necropolises. elongated skulls, superior cranial capacity, characteristics incompatible with mere artificial deformation. Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, displayed such strange physical traits that many consider him a late hybrid. His elongated head, asymmetric face, and tall stature all coincide with the descriptions found in ancient Ethiopian texts. Was Akhenaten the last attempt to restore the original lineage of the Watchers upon the throne of the Nile? His monotheistic revolution could have been a return to the primordial religion that preceded Egyptian polytheism. The religion of a single celestial god, vaguely remembered as the father of the Watchers in Ethiopian texts. If this is true, then Akhenaten was eliminated precisely for trying to reveal too much to the common people. His name was erased, his statues destroyed, his temples demolished, his followers scattered and silenced. A damnatio memoriae that only applies to those who have touched truths too dangerous to circulate freely. And after Akhenaten, Egypt entered a decline from which it would never fully recover as a civilization. As if the vital force of the ancient lineage had definitively exhausted itself with that last visionary pharaoh. But the blood, the Ethiopians say, never completely extinguishes. It only dilutes and waits for the right moment. There are current African populations with extraordinary heights that anthropology cannot fully explain. The Dinka of Sudan often exceed 2 meters on average, without a known exact genetic cause for this phenomenon. The Tutsi of Rwanda and Burundi also present an anomalously elevated stature compared to neighboring peoples. The Watutsi in particular were described by European explorers as dark-skinned giants with innate nobility. Are these peoples diluted descendants of that antediluvian lineage mentioned in the sacred texts? Modern genetics has found in some African groups sequences that do not appear in any other population. Archaic sequences predating human migration out of Africa, whose origin remains an open enigma. Some researchers speak of a ghost population, an ancient group now vanished but genetically real. Could that ghost population be the biological trace of the hybrids described by Enoch and the Jubilees? Science still does not dare to openly formulate this question, but the data seems to push it toward that conclusion. Meanwhile, local legends in Ethiopia and Sudan continue to speak of ancient giant kings in the mountains. Kings who lived in underground palaces, guarding treasures and knowledge inherited from primordial times. These legends are not isolated folklore. They coincide with similar descriptions in Yemen, Oman, and the Arabian Peninsula. The entire Horn of Africa region seems to share a common mythical substrate regarding antediluvian giants. A substrate that classical Egyptology has systematically chosen to ignore for the last 2 centuries. Perhaps because accepting this substrate would mean completely rewriting the very origin of human civilization. It would mean admitting that Africa is not only the cradle of Homo sapiens, but also the stage of a lost history. A history in which superior beings, whether called Anunnaki, Watchers, or Neteru, intervened directly. A history in which gods walked among men, fathered hybrids, and taught forbidden technologies. A history that Ethiopia preserved intact because it was too far from Rome to be completely censored. A history that Egypt preserved in stone, but whose meaning was lost when the last priests died. A history that Sumeria recorded in clay, but whose tablets lay buried for centuries under the dust of the Euphrates. 3 independent witnesses, 3 geographies, 3 languages, 3 traditions that tell exactly the same story. The statistical probability that this is pure coincidence is practically 0 from any serious perspective. And yet, School textbooks continue to present these civilizations as isolated, spontaneous emergences, as if each one had separately invented writing, astronomy, metallurgy, and monumental architecture, when the textual evidence points exactly in the opposite direction, toward a forgotten common source. That common source, hidden in the yellowed pages of the Ethiopian Bible, awaits to be read with new eyes. Eyes that do not dismiss the extraordinary simply because it challenges the currently dominant materialistic paradigm. Eyes capable of seeing in the giants not a myth, but a historical chapter torn from the book of humanity. A chapter that begins with 200 watchers descending upon Hermon and ends with their children devouring each other. A chapter that continues with the hybrid pharaohs of the Nile and extends to the last colossi of the Mediterranean. A chapter that Western theology decided to close, but that Ethiopian tradition has kept open until today. And precisely for this reason, the texts of Axum are now more relevant than ever for understanding our origins. Because without them, the history of Egypt lacks the prologue that would finally make it comprehensible and coherent. Without Enoch, the Neteru are abstractions, but with Enoch, they become characters with names and biographies. Without the Jubilees, the Nephilim are legends, but with the Jubilees, they become a historically documented race. Without the Ethiopian Bible, the past of Africa remains mutilated, reduced to a succession of dynasties without deep context. With the Ethiopian Bible, Africa emerges as the true battlefield between superior beings and primitive humans. A battlefield whose remnants remain visible in the pyramids, in the obelisks, in the colossal sarcophagi, and also in the reliefs where the pharaoh always appears as a titan dominating armies of small men. These reliefs were not propaganda. They were faithful portraits of a biological reality that later slowly diluted. A reality in which the king was literally another species, another race, another order of creature entirely different. When Ethiopians read these sacred texts, they do not read mythology. They read the official chronicle of their own land. For them, the giants are as real as Solomon, as Menelik, as the later historical kings documented in their history. And the connection with Egypt is not academic, it is ancestral, felt in the bones by every elder of the mountains. Because the Ethiopian mountains witnessed the passage of the Watchers, saw the giants fall, and saw the survivors flee. Those mountains guard sealed caves that tradition considers tombs of giants never officially explored. Some expeditions attempted to reach them, but were stopped by local religious authorities. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church considers these places too dangerous to be disturbed by modern curiosity. And perhaps they are right, because certain secrets, once released, can never be locked away again. Perhaps that is why Rome decided to eliminate the Book of Enoch from the official biblical canon in the early centuries. Because that book contained too much information about the real origin of royalty, war, and human evil. Information that would have empowered the common people and weakened the control of established religious elites. And that is why Ethiopia, isolated by its mountains, became the only refuge where the truth could survive intact. Survive until this exact moment when we finally begin to read between its lines. To read that the Sumerian Anunnaki, the Hebrew Watchers, and the Egyptian Neteru are three faces of the same enigma. To read that the giants were not a metaphor for human sin, but a concrete race that dominated prehistory. To read that Egyptian civilization was their last great work before their blood diluted into the human ocean. To read that Africa was not only colonized by humans, but visited by beings that changed its destiny forever. And to read, finally, that the line between God and man was once physically crossed by hybrid entities. Entities whose memory survives in stone, in parchment, in blood, in the symbols we still do not know how to decipher well. Entities whose return, according to certain Ethiopian prophecies, is written in the last chapters of the Book of Enoch. Prophecies that speak of a final time when the chained watchers will be judged before all humanity, and in which the righteous will see face to face those whom they once confused with true gods from the high heavens. Until then, we have the silent task of recovering the scattered fragments of that buried history, of uniting Egypt with Ethiopia, Sumeria with Israel, Genesis with the Book of Enoch, science with sacred tradition. Because only by uniting all the fragments of the broken mirror can we finally see the complete face of our past. A face that is not fully human, nor fully divine, but something intermediate, strange, and deeply disturbing. A face that looks back at us from the walls of Karnak, from the manuscripts of Axum, from the tablets of Nineveh. A face that for centuries we preferred not to recognize, but that now, finally, demands to be named with courage. That face has ancient names: Anunnaki, Watchers, Neteru, Sons of God, but they all mean the same thing. They mean that we were not alone at the origin, that humanity was forged by hands that were not merely human, and that the most solid proof of this uncomfortable truth is written word for word in the ancient Ethiopian Bible, the book that Rome rejected, that the West ignored, and that only the monks of the mountains kept alive. If all this has made you reflect, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to continue unearthing mysteries.